Hello and welcome to another episode of the Peninsula Biz Buzz with the Chamber of Commerce here on the Peninsula. My name is Shelley Smith. I'm the liaison for PenSherm's Society of Human Resources and owner of Premier Rapport. And with me, of course, is the illustrious leader.
Huh.
That's where you intro yourself.
Oh, that's me. Okay. So I'm Bob McKenna, and I am the president and CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. And I'm still amazed every time I say that because I'm a retired Navy captain, and I had no idea what a Chamber of Commerce did a year and a half ago. So it still amazes me when I introduce myself. With us today for the first or second, depending on how you slice it, version of Peninsula Biz Buzz, and I probably should have had the first, and I could have asked John Martin if Peninsula Biz Buzz was actually a good name for it.
Yeah, considering that's
John Martin is with us today. He is the COO and managing partner of SIR, which stands for Southeastern Institute of Research, and that is billed as a new kind of strategic management consultancy. And I like this, John, this quote from your webpage: "A small band of curious minds eager to make a difference for our clients, community, and world." And I really like that tag. That's pretty cool. So SIR was founded in 1964. So I'm assuming that you're not the founder. Because you probably would have been about 2 years old then. Right. And John, I met John about a year ago now, and as part of a mega region, potential mega region collaborative between Richmond and Hampton Roads. And John actually lives in Richmond and Hampton Roads, so he is the mega region personified. But today we're going to talk about another initiative that John and I are working on together, and it's called Envision 2020, and it's a regional branding initiative for the Hampton Roads region. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, John, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. Shelley, thank you for having me. Boy, there's a lot to share about this regional branding initiative. We're calling it Envision 2020 as sort of a double entendre. We're asking people to envision the future and what our region would be like if everybody understood us. And we're trying to do it with a lot of research in order to have a 2020 foresight so we can really predict what's going to happen. So this has been a incredible team effort. We feel like to study the region's brand and to understand how stakeholders perceive us and to deal with really, almost controversial issues like what name should we be calling ourselves, we really had to have the right players at the table. So with your help, Bob, and other leaders in Hampton Roads and in the Peninsula area, we really pulled together what I think is sort of the who's who of organizations that have a rightful seat at the table in determining big things like what's our brand and how should we be named and how should we market this region moving forward. So the first thing I really want to share is that there are probably 200 people involved with this initiative, dozens of organizations from the Management Roundtable to the Community Foundation to the two chambers, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and I could just go on and on from there. But I will tell you, when our work is finally done, a lot of people will have participated, and a lot of people will be feel very included in this process.
So you did mention right up front, I thought that was great, that, and I don't know that controversial is the right word, and I know that the way you said it, you didn't think maybe controversial was the right word either, but it gets to the point a little bit. The name of the region, because when people hear that I am on is it the process task force or the project task force, whatever, the 25 people that are kind of leading this effort, I have people calling me on the phone and saying, hey, I just want to make sure that this is not an effort just to rename our region, and I have to reassure them all the time that it's research-based analysis, and it's a very careful process that's being led by SIR and the Hampton Roads Chamber and Reinvent Hampton Roads. But I'm really impressed with the process. I went in. I think everybody went in a little skeptical, John.
Yeah.
Just because of the controversies surrounding this issue. But I think, so talk about that a little bit. How are we making sure that it's sensitive to those people who have that concern?
Well, it's really sensitive to thoughtful marketing. I mean, what we're talking about here is not just coming up with a name or a new name. And so much of the discussion over the past decade, and maybe even beyond, ever since the Hampton Roads name was first offered up by the mayors of the region, people have been second guessing it and saying it should be coastal Virginia, it should be Tidewater Virginia, it should be something else. And it's really become just sort of fair game and maybe a fun sport to really keep thinking about what's the name. In marketing, there has been an interesting evolution of how cities think of themselves and how regions think of themselves. For a long time, most city leaders were focused on just making a great place making. But now there's an emerging science that you got to let people know what you're about. You got to let people know who you are and how you're positioned vis-a-vis the competition and what's your unique selling proposition and why should future residents want to come and tourists want to come and even stay, and why should businesses invest in your region in terms of expanding or moving. And so understanding that from a marketing lens is now a new science called place marketing. And place marketing really starts with understanding what are the perceptions and misperceptions that stakeholders have about our place, and then how are we unique or different compared to our peer cities, our competitors, our peer regions, the places that companies, frankly, are looking at to decide between 3 or 4 locations, where am I going to move my company? Or where am I going to expand my next operation? And so understanding your competitive position and what are your unique strengths? And then based on those, how do I communicate? What should be the iconology that we use that really represents the uniqueness of our community? What should be the key messages that we use that really will differentiate us? That's place marketing. And only until you have all of those things figured out can you really assess the naming architecture. Well, then what should our name be? And so let me give you some examples. When I think about Hampton Roads, and we're right in the middle of a lot of research, we're trying to understand, what do people think about Hampton Roads? What really differentiates us? And one of the things that we're hearing early on in our research is just the amazing presence of water everywhere. And if you think about what is the benefit of that water and what does it do for you, people love to talk about that in terms of how it makes them feel renewed, how it gives them a sense of almost like living in a semi-resort. But it's so different. And I can tell you, living in 2 different cities, it's completely different when I'm in Richmond versus Hampton Roads and being surrounded by water in Hampton Roads. So what that would say as we develop our communication strategy is we've got to figure out a way to romance our water. And when we think about what does that mean for a naming strategy, it would be great if it has something to do with water, not only maybe in the name itself or in a tagline, but all that gets back to, this is a marketing issue. How do we figure out what is our true competitive advantage? How do people see us? What are some misperceptions we have to change? How should we be positioned vis-a-vis the competition? And then based on that, what are the implications for our name? Not only our formal name, but our informal name as well.
John, you alluded to this earlier, that this discussion's been going on for quite some time. I know when I first moved into the area back in '92, there were discussions around this. So it's definitely been tiptoeing in and out of it for a while. Can you give the listeners and viewers a little bit on the timeline of the research? You mentioned being in the thralls of the research. Can you unpack that just a little bit more to give a view?
Absolutely. This is a research-inspired process, and I think that gave all of the leaders who are organizing and supervising and funding this initiative some great confidence. We are doing a number of strategic studies. There are so many audiences that affect the reputation of a region. It starts right at the center with residents, the people who live in the region, but it also is business leaders. It has to be thought of in terms of tourists as well. Who are the tourists that have come and the tourists that are potentially going to come? They have a big influence on how they perceive the region and how they talk about the region. But then we also have a business angle as well. You have to understand business leaders, regional business leaders, as well as business leaders and site selection consultants that make decisions on where companies move. So there are all these audiences that we needed to touch. So we have designed a comprehensive survey process where we're doing about 7 different surveys against each of these audiences to try to assess how are we currently perceived, what are some of our advantages and disadvantages, and leading to what would be our optimal positioning, and then testing some of the various names that have risen up through this whole process. So through a very sophisticated research technique, we're actually testing names. And that's a point I want to make about testing names. You know, Hampton Roads has been used for now a couple of decades, and it has some degree of equity in it. How much is what we're trying to discern through the research. But it's not about let's end this whole process with our recommended positioning and our recommended name and just assume that we're going to have a new name. That would be a huge mistake. We need to go into this process saying, Hampton Roads is our name. Is there a better alternative? Is Hampton Roads hurting us as a name? Does it have zero equity outside of our region in terms of no one knowing what it is? And when people hear it, do they immediately think something negative? Or conversely, do we have a lot of equity in the Hampton Roads name? Is it a positive thing both locally and nationally? And when people hear it that have never heard it before, what do they think? So all those issues have to be addressed in this comprehensive 9-month research-driven process.
So John,
go ahead.
So you've actually alluded to some of the challenges here. I see coming into this process, and I know you're going to agree with me because I probably got it from you, but I see one of the greatest challenges is the diversity of our region. And I don't mean diversity as in race, religion, gender, that kind of thing. I mean the geographical diversity, so 17 localities making up this region. And when when different people think about this region, the first thing that pops into their mind is science and technology, or history and tourism, or water and recreation, or maritime shipbuilding, the port, largest Navy base, so the military presence. So there's many different things that we're really good at and that we're maybe even a national leader in.
That's right.
So how do you market an area that is that diverse economically, and we could be stronger, but we are diverse, and that diverse geographically. So, so for instance, and you've been involved in these projects before, Charlotte or someplace like that, or Richmond even. There is one center city that is we call this the Greater Metropolitan Richmond area or something like that.
That's right.
Here we have how many cities, how many localities, and everybody wants to be first. So how do you get around that challenge?
Well, I wish there was a silver bullet that we could have to address that. Unfortunately, there isn't. And it's actually what makes this particular initiative really exciting to work on. Because Hampton Roads, whether we intentionally did this or it happened just by coincidence, evolved into 17 jurisdictions. And when you look at those 17 jurisdictions and you really unpack them and you look at the website, and I'm just going to pick one, Newport News. If you look at the website for Newport News and you look at the municipal website and the economic development website and the tourism website, they really focus on Newport News and very little mention to being in Hampton Roads. And I'm not picking on Newport News. It's that way at the 16 other jurisdictions too. Right. It's that way with many of the universities. It's that way on and on. So what has happened over the years is we've evolved geographically, but we haven't embraced a regional ethos. And so we're not seeing that marketing of a region. In fact, I think there's been a big void of that over the years, that everybody's done a good job with their own little hamlet. And we see that even in social media when people originate posts from Hampton Roads, it's usually a love affair with their own local community. So part of the answer is we've got to step back with all the research findings and engage this discussion with leaders like you and others to say, what's missing? Why aren't we communicating more as a region and plugging the region the same time at the same level that we're plugging our individual jurisdictions? The second issue very much related to that is how do we define the region? And so we have built into our surveys, on the local surveys, the business leaders and the resident survey, to ask people, well, what do you call this region now? And then how do you define this region geographically? So it's going to be fascinating to see if people say, oh yeah, the region is Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Hampton and Newport News, or if some people say, oh no, it's from Virginia Beach to Williamsburg.
Right.
Technically, the last thought is the technically correct thought when you look at the region through the eyes of the Planning District Commission and how the regional cooperation between all these jurisdictions work. So it's going to be a question for us to think about, I think, rationally and emotionally, how big is our region when we talk about it, and how do we all talk about it in a collective, seamless way?
John, you've mentioned the surveys a couple of times. I want to make sure that we clarify the ones that the residents and the businesses, because you've got a couple coming up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's right. Thank you for asking that question. The next two surveys, and I've mentioned we're doing 7, and some of them are out of market and some are in market, in region. The 2 that are in region, the one that is coming up next is a business leader survey, and that's going out to the chambers, management roundtable of Hampton Roads, and the civic organization. The business leader survey will launch the day after Labor Day, after the holiday, and it'll be in the field about 2 weeks. And then in mid-September, we're going to launch a region-wide residents survey. And that's going to be pushed out by many, many organizations that are part of Envision 2020, as well as, we hope, the media. And so our great hope is that thousands of people will participate in this important initiative through the resident survey. So I would really encourage your listeners and viewers, in mid-September, start to look for this link and follow the buzz about this resident survey and participate. Let's have thousands of people be part of this important project, because in the end, we all have an enlightened self-interest. It's about advancing the place that we love and call home.
Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that you framed it that it's, don't rush through this, the importance of the 9-month research. Let's see what comes up. Don't make any assumptions.
Yes.
I think everybody, and Bob, the people who have called you hopefully will appreciate this approach, and that it's very intentional and purposeful. So this is a conversation I feel like we literally could talk about for hours, and could have done live and had people call in.
That's right.
And maybe we need to do that on the next.
Certainly let us share the results with you at the end.
Yeah, there you go. That would be perfect. But Bob, you've got some wrap up intentional questions before we go into that mode.
Yes, and these are quick answer kind of things, John.
Okay.
So, and I'm kind of throwing back some of the things that you've thrown at our task force. 3. So, when you think of Hampton Roads as a resident, 3 favorable images that pop into your mind.
Well, I just have to think about the water everywhere. I think about the diversity that I see in people, and in terms of the amazing history that it represents, 400 years of just about every part of America's history.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. How about 3 negative images? What do we need to work on?
Well, I think my firm, fortunately or unfortunately, gets to work for a lot of companies and organizations. So I have a unique perspective informed by research, but congestion, traffic congestion is a huge one. And I see that getting improved with the $5 billion in construction that's going on. More than any other market in the country, Hampton Roads has gotten it together to build its way out of this construction problem. So number 1, congestion. I think number 2, the big negative is something that I've talked in a positive sense, but it's the lack of people understanding just how much regionalism is getting traction. I think that we're working more and more as a region, and it's my great hope that this project actually speeds up this perspective of seeing the tremendous advantages of the region. And then the last one, I think, is the flip side of diversity. I think that Hampton Roads, like many other markets, suffers from people not working as hard together as they could possibly, and maybe even this lack of civility in public governments and in the news and everything. I think that's just something that we have to fix. And I think Hampton Roads has an opportunity, because in our research, we're finding that one of the things that we're known for is diversity and inclusion. And it's because we have so many different types of people coming and going in Hampton Roads. So if we could turn that into an asset and be known as a big tent community where everybody is welcome, where everybody can find their place and feels like they belong, it will give us a decided advantage over other markets. So I think our weaknesses are all actually real opportunities that can be turned into strengths. And I hope this body of work actually can inspire some of that.
Love that.
So how about if we call it the region of brotherly love?
Love it.
That's perfect. Okay, the other one I was going to ask you already answered, is about the challenges in branding the region. We had a nice conversation about that. The last thing I would like to ask you, you are a resident of Richmond and
in Norfolk.
Tell me what's the best, so compare those two and say, here's what Norfolk is doing better, or the Hampton Roads region, and here's what Richmond is doing better. So kind of a lessons learned thing. This is what we could learn from Richmond. This is what they could learn from us.
Wow. That's about 10 more podcasts worth.
Yeah, well, that certainly gets to the collaborative mega region discussion.
I think that there are lessons for both of us. I think that when I go back and forth between the markets, I find from the business leader standpoint that we're more alike than different. And so
it's okay. Life happens.
Okay. Just wait for this to play out. But I really feel like when I think about the two markets, Richmond, we call it RVA here, in Hampton Roads, I feel like we've got a lot to learn from each other, because the business leadership, I think, spiritually is more alike than different. And I compare us to other markets, and I get to travel all over the country. And I just see a great concern, about growing our local economies. I see a great concern about helping one another and trying to involve young people. And I feel like both of us are trying to do that. And the idea that we've come together to think about creating a mega region and to have really the top 250 people in each market involved in this idea of bringing our markets closer together, I think speaks to that similarity and belief in ourselves. So I think that's where we really are similar. I think where we're different, Hampton Roads is a little more laid back. It's rare that I go to meetings in Hampton Roads and anybody's wearing a tie. And I think the water has a lot to do with that, and just the spirit of being a quasi resort and being around so much outdoor activities. In Richmond, we're still wearing ties at a lot of meetings, and I think we're celebrating a lot of the history that we have that and our association with being the state capital. So, I think there's just various geographic ties that make us who we are, and that's just the fact. But over time, I see us becoming closer and closer, and across not only physical boundaries but also emotional boundaries.
Excellent. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to work with you and to do this podcast with you. Over to you, Shelley.
So Bob had pulled one of the things off of your website, and I saw that, and I also saw the description of the group. And so I found this interesting as well. So you got on here that our partners could run their own consulting firms. In fact, most of them have or did.
Right.
And then you've got Meet the Minds of SIR. We are a collection of thinkers, researchers, marketers, PR gurus, futurists, thriving in a culture of doing. we have, everybody has their accolades, but we embrace the SIR way of getting things done. We collaborate on the big stuff and the small stuff, and definitely our region, whatever it ends up being named, is definitely a benefit for that collaboration in your approach. And I wanted to make sure that, again, those listeners who are not as familiar with who you are and what it is that you do understand the big picture of your company as well. So we thank you again today, John. And Bob, any final comments before we do a sign off?
No, I would like to keep talking for a half hour with John on this one, just on this Envision 2020.
Yeah.
But John, we're going to have you back soon to talk about the Mega Region Collaborative, because I think these two things are two of the most important things that are going right now for the Hampton Roads area future. So I'm glad that you're involved. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Thank you. And listening,
Bye.
make sure you guys do the surveys. If you're listening and viewing this in the month of September, reach out as business leaders and reach out residents and participate, get involved. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Hey, buddy.